we as a Board of Education don't set traffic rates, the speed limits, or zones, as it were. The city's responsible for that, but we have worked quite closely with them in the past to do that. So kudos to you for this, and I think it's really important that you take it a couple more steps forward. I'm sure we could help you get in touch with the Chief of Police.
So you could be very busy, but very busy for a good reason.
Well, and I just want to add the end of the community project, actually, like they were supposed to have done the service by, what was it, February the 25th, but these two were like, no. We've done what we can, but we want to continue this. So they're not doing it for me, they're not doing it for us, they're doing it because this is what they really want. So, you know, I forgot to mention that in the beginning.
Doing it for all of us. We thank you so very much for that. Boy, you represent your school, and I love the t-shirts. Happy Pride. All right.
And I can see it from here, but could you turn around and show the board the back of your shirt?
Different one,
Oh.
But also show the back of your shirt.
I don't have anything on my.
Oh.
It says Husky Hero.
All right. Well, I also have the pleasure of being the trustee liaison to Abbotsford Middle. And for your brave and insightful presentation, we have a small gift for you to say thank you for coming. So, well done. I'm going to shake your hand. I think we finished with questions, and so looks like you got some more work to be done, but thank you for what you've done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have thank you, folks. We have a second delegation of parents from Abbotsford Traditional School, 5 of whom are going to speak, and I see that we have Nancy Steiger, excuse the pronunciation if I'm, Carol McClellan, Sahib Baya, is that how I say it? I apologize if that's incorrect. Kaljit Sangha and Saranjit Sandra. So you have 10 minutes to share with us.
All right.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Nancy Steiger. I have 2 children in the traditional school program, one at South Poplar and one at ATMS. I'm also the PAC co-chair at ATMS. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak here, to share our voice and our concerns regarding potential relocation of our ATSS students to Recanton. We are a group of traditional parents and PAC members who've come together to voice the concerns of many parents. We are here because we want to ensure the best interests of our children are considered and protected. We hope that the overwhelming turnout of parents and students from all of the traditional schools at the public consultation meeting in March demonstrate to you how much passion and support there is for the traditional program. So what makes the traditional program unique and worthwhile? A uniform. When my children get up in the morning, the first thing they do is put on their uniform. This is a simple act that begins and helps to prepare them for their day. This is a school day, a day they get to learn, a day when they know what is expected of them. Integrity, courage, hard work, respect. Doing reinforcement and positive affirmation of these traditional values is also one of those things that makes the traditional program an excellent program. A strong emphasis on reading, writing, and math. This year, my middle school child raised $330 for his school library by reading 25 hours in 10 days. That's a lot of reading, but his love of reading didn't come by accident. It came because of the emphasis of his parents and his teachers. Parent participation is strong and a key part of our schools. A structured environment in the classroom and schools as exemplified by the closed campus and no spares for ATSS students. High academic expectations and a focus on standards instills in our students discipline and strong study skills. It is well known that graduates from ATSS are well ahead of their peers both academically and technologically. Together with the administrators, teachers, and support workers, we have built a community of respectful, high academic achievers who impress any visitor who walks into the building. This is the gold standard for the district. Hardworking, smart, respectful, conscientious citizens. So what happens to these unique aspects of the traditional program if our students are relocated to Recanton? Our concern is that these values, these standards will fall away, that they will not be preserved, and that the quality and intentionality of the traditional program will be lost.
Hi, my name is Carell McKellen, and I drive my kids from Mission every day to all 3 campuses because of the value we see in the traditional program. A lot of families have been together since kindergarten, and we feel that our choice is being taken away from us by being asked to relocate. Parents here lined up a week in advance, parking an RV by King Traditional up until 2007 when we went to online registration to get a chance to have our children enrolled in the traditional elementary schools. If relocated, how would the students that are wearing uniforms fit in with the students that aren't? Would Rick Hansen convert to a closed campus style, or would ATSS have to convert to an open campus mentality, which would lose the strict environment that the students are used to? The timing of this move is even more distressing since the school has been on a positive culture shift for several years. The sports programs has had unprecedented success in basketball, and that's building a growing sense of pride at both ATMS and ATSS. Whereas student athletes were previously transferring to schools with larger sports programs with more resources, they're now choosing to stay here. This is translated down through the high school and middle school. The school has punched above our weight as a smaller school, and it's only poised to get better. Attendance at sporting events has continued to grow and is now at an all-time high, leading to greater sense of school spirit than ever before. All of this would be stopped, derailed, set back by a move to Hansen. I would like to introduce a student in grade 8 at ATMS that is directly affected by your decision, Sahibaya.
I'll see Gordy even told my name, and I'm just kind of here to give more of a student perspective and just sort of ask you guys some questions about what you're doing here. Firstly, we already haven't been getting a lot of support when it comes to extracurricular activities and other programs. And it just genuinely feels that we don't matter as a student body to the school board. Again, that may not be your intent, but that's really how it's coming across to us. You've already pushed back renovations for our school since 2013, and now you're punishing us once again due to your unwillingness to give us these renovations by forcing us to go to Hansen instead of giving us our portables. A sort of question I want to ask is, why aren't we kind of being treated equally and on the same level as schools like Yale and Mowat, who have already received their seismic renovations and have been given portables? It just does not really compute with me, like why we're being treated lesser than them, sort of. We have want to deny it or not, we have a very different ethos and student culture to Hansen, and trying to put us in Hansen, it just won't blend, it won't work. It's going to be trying to put a bunch of Martians in the middle of Vancouver. We already used to the traditional system and want to stay here. Even if a lot of us didn't really pick to go to traditional and it was more of our parents, we've become used to the system. And it really seems like our choice of education is not valuable to you guys, or is it something expendable to you? We see recent announcements in the paper about provincial funding other schools, and quotes from the board saying they're pleased to give funding and help out students who need this specialized programs in education. And we're just left kind of asking the question, why aren't we being treated the same way? We don't really ask for anything. We haven't really received anything, and now when it's our time to actually receive something that will help us, we're like wanting to save money. It's really a matter of saving money for you guys. It is what it seems like. My point of my whole section here is to not make you guys feel bad. It's not trying to be like, you're horrible people. Like, you probably don't care what I say, to be honest. But I just really want to ask you guys a question. Do you think what you're doing is right? And do you think you're standing by doing what's right for students, faculty, and parents of ATSS and ATMS?
By relocating to Hansen, yes, there may be capacity for 1,100 students, but how do you have the 2 schools on the same campus jockeying for the same labs, band room, gym, and classroom spaces at the same time? It's actually a logistical nightmare. I was the parent at the ATSS meeting in March that had said that we need to look into split shifts. So over the spring break, I did a lot of research. Split shifts were used in Surrey School District at Elgin and Semiahmoo High School because they were overcrowded. And they have now abandoned it because it's not helpful for the students and teachers because of the early morning or late evenings. It affected their extracurricular activities, homework, and jobs outside of school. So my question is, why not phase the work to be done at ATSS and do work during the summer, like the ATSS band room and the ATMS gym, in order to get them completed sooner? One of the great aspects of the traditional campus is the close proximity of ATMS. We are an interconnected group of families, parents, siblings, teachers, and administration with shared values and a shared traditional model. Coaches coaching across middle and high schools with mentoring in place between the two schools, with high school kids volunteering coaching at the middle school. ATMS has some capacity and a couple of empty classrooms. They would be the most logical partner for us to cooperate with during their work. We are willing to sacrifice and accommodate our own families and friends to preserve the ATSS culture and momentum. If we were to do phased work and share with ATMS, we would need at most 4 portables. Contractors say the actual costs for portables don't have to be the most expensive option. They could be secondhand without toilets and water hookups when there are bathrooms in the school that can be used. This will actually shave off the cost from the $250,000 projected for each portable as was listed at the meeting in March. Why would we split shift or experiment with other drastic methods at a place like Hanson, which creates a whole list of other problems when we would be more willing and flexible to do it with ATMS and only be dealing with logistics and not the other traditional fit-in issues with Hanson? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kuljit Sangha. The district made the decision years ago to stop doing maintenance at ATSS. This deferred maintenance has now built up to the large cost and time required today. That is a direct result of that choice. Where did the funds go that should have been spent on yearly maintenance at ATSS? Were they spent elsewhere in the district, or were they set aside and saved for this work? Allowing the building to deteriorate has been a key factor in the declining enrollment. So using the past few years of enrollment trends to predict forward does not make sense. If the building is improved and attention is paid, the enrollment will come back. Abbey Senior, as an example, was declining in enrollment. Then funds were spent on seismic upgrade and rebuild. Adding new programs, now it's at capacity, so clearly building and attention affects the enrollment regardless of the location. If we build it, they will come back. It seems like the district is using the most extremely low enrollment predictions and the most extremely high time and cost predictions to justify the Hanson relocation. The district used to pay a lot of attention to the traditional programs, including a website celebrating traditional achievement and accomplishments, a traditional advisory committee that sought out ways to grow the program and ensure that it prospered. Give us those resources, give us the facility and the attention that you once did, and the passionate parents here stand ready to help ATSS thrive and correct any enrollment trends that you are concerned about. One of the issues created by the lack of a clear and strong statement and decision from the district regarding the potential closure and the potential move to Hanson is that students and parents have already started to scramble. They have been inquiring at other schools, and the admin at those other secondary schools in the district have not been given clear directives on the fact that ATSS is not being closed. And therefore, there is a lot of rumors and misinformation floating around that we hope would be clarified as soon as possible. One of the many benefits to the district of having the traditional model in place as a choice school is that we draw students from all catchment areas and other cities in order to alleviate overcrowding at other schools. ATSS is currently comprised of roughly 58% of students from the Hanson catchment and 42% from other catchments. This group will splinter with a forced relocation to Hanson. The 42% non-Hanson catchment students who were traveling to come to a traditional school will go back to their catchment schools. This will create overcrowding at Mowat and Abbey Senior and force money to be spent there on portables, the same money that you are trying to save here. There's already reasons why the 58% Hanson catchment students chose ATSS over Hanson. They chose not to go there even though it may have been closer, and they will not all go there now as part of a forced relocation. And although some of them live in the Hanson catchment, they actually moved there to be closer to ATMS and ATSS. That leaves a very real scenario that less than half, possibly only a third of the current ATSS students will actually relocate to Hanson. There will be heavy attrition here, and your decision here could rip apart this school group. There will also be a trickle-down effect of students leaving ATMS and the elementary schools. When a middle school family pulls their child out, they're also going to pull younger siblings out of traditional elementary schools. And finally, another destination for families pulling out of traditional will eventually be private schools. We will be taking some of the best and brightest permanently out of the public system. The amount of students returning to ATSS after this work is done will only be a fraction of what we started with. The school community will have been ripped apart. School spirit and momentum will have been destroyed, and this school will have to start over from scratch. It will take years to recover, and you will be bearing the costs of running a half-empty school until then. This is not a simple equation of picking up students, moving them over for 2 years, saving X dollars in X months, and bringing them back. The immediate cost savings will be offset by these other costs and damages of this forced relocation. You have now publicly stated a position several times, which we all appreciate, that ATSS will not be closed. But this action would run counter to that stated goal. You would be creating a situation where you could be effectively shutting down the school or creating the conditions to shut it down by taking this action. Finally, I would like to state that now we have all mentioned Hanson many times, but in reality, it could be any non-traditional school that we are talking about. As a parent group, we're not happy with the fact that we have been forced into the position of having to compare ourselves to Hanson. Obviously, in any parent group, there are more extreme opinions, but our sense is that the majority of parents see the non-traditional relocation as the biggest concern, not Hanson per se. The press will seize on the most sensational comments and create headlines, but we ask that that not be held against the parents and students. We are here to work with you, voice our concerns, and seek solutions that keep us on campus for all the reasons listed above.
Thank you. Oh, okay.
So I had the pleasure of giving some closing remarks. My name is Sharnjeet Kaur Sandra. I'd first like to thank you all for taking the time out to listen with open hearts and open minds. We really hope that as representatives of passionate parents and families within the traditional school systems here in School District 34, you will take the many valid points we have made with the weight and consideration it warrants and deserves. So I'm not going to summarize each and every point or question posed to you tonight. I would simply like to end with this comment to evoke some thoughts in each of you all. I would simply like to end with the question of, sorry, lost my train of thought here. We're all incredibly mindful of the fact that at the end of the day, money is what matters. And it is often money which dictates district maneuvering and decision-making. My question to you is this: how do you quantify strong values, strong ethics, strong passion, and beliefs in a traditional school model and a traditional school system? How do you quantify the potential 2 or 3 years of rupturing of these values, ethics, and principles, so much so that it will have long-term impacts in how these young minds, families grow and continue to prosper in our communities? Can you quantify this? A potential break or move to another school interim may not seem like it's going to be so devastating to some of you sitting here today. But we as parents can guarantee that a rupture in how these young minds will be brought up and will continue to function and grow. As an educator at a university, I actually see the difference that a traditional school upbringing brings in the university classroom. And my biggest concern is that it will be sacrificed in the name of quantification and numbers. Please give all the excellent points that we have made tonight their due consideration. You cannot fathom the amount of work, research, passion, and organizing that has gone through so that we can bring these points to you today. As you saw at the open consultation, the response was phenomenal. It was phenomenal because we are all committed and we all care about a traditional style of teaching that remains uninterrupted. If you all do make the decision to allow children to remain on ATSS grounds, on traditional grounds, one way or another, we can guarantee you that you will not regret this decision, and we will all work together to enhance and make this amazing school grow on all the fronts that you have concerns about. Thank you all so very much for your time.
All right. Well, as I said out in the hallway, we love the fact that there are parents that are passionate, parents and students that are passionate about their school, and it would be terrible if it was other than that. And despite your practicing, you were overtime, but I thought it important that we heard everybody. So, of course, any questions that colleagues you might have? You know that we will not respond at this time to your comments, but do we have any questions?
Chair Peterson, I actually, this is a little bit out of practice for the board to do this, But I wanted to reassure the parents here on behalf of the board, and I feel actually quite confident speaking on behalf of my colleagues about this. I don't know if you know, but at one point, 5 members of this board all had children right from the beginning.
4.
Cindy and Cindy.
Oh.
Not on the
5 of
current
us.
board, sorry.
Not on the current board, but a little while ago. And currently, we have 4 parents who, as one of your speakers alluded to, camped out on the side of the road to get our kids in when we only had elementary school for traditional. So there is no lack of passion or understanding of the traditional program, values, the commitment it takes. There is decades of years of traditional kids. I had 6 children. 5 of them went through the traditional program. We have multiple children around this table that went through that program. So if there's anything that we could impart to you, is that the best interest of your students and your families is at heart. And yeah, we do have challenging decisions to make around this, and we want to make the very best one for you. But please don't feel that we don't know or understand who you are. I think you're important. We absolutely do, because we invested of ourselves in that program. So please know.
Yes, Trustee Newfield.
And also just to remind the public too, some of these requirements and restrictions are enforced upon us by the ministry. They're not our restrictions as far as number and enrollment and all those things. That's required by the ministry. And they look at these things very carefully before they do any work in any area. So just so that you know that we are also, in some ways, our hands are tied on certain things as far as requirements to the ministry are concerned.
Trustee Anderson.
I just want to bring up, some of you do not leave early.
Good, thank you.
Because at 7:05, we're going to be talking about it.
Yes, so just to reiterate that, we've asked staff to put together some possible options, and you'll see some of the consideration. And despite what I heard from a couple of the speakers, we have not made any decision as it relates to this, okay? And I know perception becomes reality at some point, but a decision has not been made. Okay, thank you. You're gonna have to hold that question until question period, all right? Okay? All right. Moving on, let's look at reports and achievements. First, education, measuring up.
So, as the board knows, I presented the annual report at the last meeting. And the annual report is while it's a statutory requirement, it is also a requirement of this board relative to your strategic plan. There are 4 big pillars, as the board knows, associated with the strategic plan. Has to do with student success, optimized resources, engaging opportunities, and a progressive workforce. During my presentation, I shared with you the number of projects that we've undergone in the last year relative to these 4 pillars, and the measuring up report is really just I'll say an outline or a summary of some of those highlights of things that has transpired in the district to help make all students successful. The report is organized largely around the 4 pillars, so it outlines, if you take a look at the first page, the pillars, and it gives some background statistics about demographic information about the district. From there, we break the report a little bit in a little bit more detail into the 4 pillars. You see the progressive workforce, and some highlights there, and some things that we're continuing to look at. If you go down to the next section, you see engaging opportunities, which is largely about parent and community engagement and ethical, innovative use of technology, and so you see some more snapshots there as some of our accomplishments. Optimized resources is largely about wise stewardship of our budget dollars. So it identifies again some benchmarks that we hit and some information about our revenue and resources. And of course, the largest section, obviously, is the student success one, broken into early learning, middle, and our graduation report, and a special section there on the support that we offer to our diverse learners. And while you could never ever completely capture the amazing things that goes on in this district with a document like this, the idea is to celebrate and provide I'll say a reasonable sampling from around the district. So the last page shows some of the really interesting things in academics and arts and athletics. that go on every day. Our plan at this point is to try to get as wide a distribution of this document as possible. Obviously, we will send electronic copies through School Messenger home, but I think it's really important, as you well know, there's so much of our population do not have children in our schools, and I think it's really important that they continue to have confidence in the work that's going on being led by the board. And so part of our distribution will be to businesses and community agencies as well. So yeah, so I don't think I have anything else to say on that. If there's any questions, I'll certainly entertain them.
Trustee Wilson.
Thank you for that, Superintendent Godden. How many printed copies will be available and where will they be distributed?
That is a good question.
We're going to be sending 150 copies to each school, so through inter-office mail, and then we'll also keep a stash here at school. We obviously we have about 500 copies on hand for our school year. So the bulk of it will be in our schools in the main office, and then of course any requests that we get will be able to supplement those copies.
So my further question to the superintendent, you talked about spreading it far and wide because most of our parents are not in the building.
Right, so.
Or most of our public, sorry.
So I think this would have been a few years ago. I think the board created a list of key community agencies, partner agencies, and so we would operate from that list, because invariably if there's been a consultation or something, that would be the group that we would send it out to. So what I would propose is that would be the group. So I could certainly, the board, if you wanted to see it, to update it, absolutely, you could do that, because I think it's important. I mean, we have ready access to parents and students and staff to send it out, but I think it's really important that the community broadly sees that, so.
Well, thank you, Superintendent Godden, I appreciate that. I, for one, I saw some nodding around the table, but I would like to see those groups.
Yep.
That'd be pretty awesome, thank you.
Anything else? So we've got lots to be proud about, and I think one of the things we should be proud of is the quality of this document. I think this represents us well. All right. Okay, Community Matters Award nominations.
So, the process for the last few years has been to, I'll say, recognize those in the community who have had a significant impact in supporting the work that the board does, recognizing that we are not the only child-serving agency in this community. This was an idea from the board that came in part out of a review of community partnerships, identifying the countless number of organizations and people out there doing stuff to support kids. And so I thought it was a fantastic idea a few years ago when the board made the decision to have this process to recognize community members or organizations that do good work for kids. It actually sits right here, which I think is really, really cool. And so on an annual basis, what we try to do is have a formal launch where we invite nominations for the award. And so I am happy to start the process here. We would typically send the information out, and then the process would be by the end of the year, the board would take and review nominations and would make a recommendation. And as we did last year, I think if I just slide over here, it was St. John's Ambulance that won the award last year, again in recognition of the things that they do and working in partnership with us. So I bring this to the board for information. As you know, we had a small subcommittee of trustees and staff take a look at the report, and you see the nomination criteria there presented. So I present this to you for information, and the proposed timeline, if you take a closer look, sees that we would open the nominations basically today, and begin advertising and inviting people to make nominations. And in the month of May, that would continue and through social media advertising. And the committee would meet at the end of May, and hopefully at a board meeting at the end in June, we would be able to provide and recognize that person at a board meeting. So I turn that over to you for your information.
Okay, questions, comments? I saw your,
Oh, sure, I wanted to,
Yes.
just do a check-in here to see if either trustees Latham or Anderson, who worked on this, if they wanted to speak to it first, because I understand it came from that committee.
trustee Anderson?
Then I'm willing to speak.
Yeah.
Trustee Latham and I and Carla, we met, and before we had it for individuals as well as for community groups. And we felt that this year we would go just with community groups for nominations. We felt that there's so many individuals who are involved, it's hard to pick one over another one, but community groups are a group of individuals put together, and we felt that it was better to go with the community groups. So that's what our criteria is for this year, and if we want to change for next year, we can go ahead and do that. So that's my...
Of course, that is a change. We used to recognize individuals, but the recommendation from our subcommittee is that we looked at excluding individuals. Yes, trustee Wilson.
I recognize that this, a couple different things. One, I would like to try, thank trustees Latham and Anderson for their work on this behalf along with staff. There is some good history that goes with this award. I was very disturbed, and I'm going to communicate that quite strongly, that we are removing individuals from the recommendations. This is a process that came from the board. While it's presented here as a report from staff, ultimately it's a board decision. There is no recommendation to accept or not accept. It's just presented as is. I do not support the removal of individuals or individuals named on that plaque. I recognize there have been some decrease in number of the interest, names submitted, put forward. However, not really significantly, because we never had a significant amount in the beginning. It wasn't something that was a large amount. I do believe, because I sat in on the first couple groups, there were, I think, 11, and not many of those were individuals, actually. Most of them were community groups. I think that by removing individuals, we're doing a disservice to the significant number of students that are impacted directly because of an individual that's contributing to our, to the education system. Sorry, I'm very passionate about this. I'm hopeful that we can bring this back again next year. It is the board's award. We've already delayed it this year because the committee did not meet, so the process has started a little later. There was nothing to say that we actually had to start the process again tomorrow, apparently, is from the date that I understand. It is entirely up to the board about whether we start it tomorrow or we delay it until we have a better process in place, until we have greater criteria. So I am, again, making a plea to the board that we consider that individuals are relevant and important. We've never had more than 11 applications. It's great. I think it's fantastic that we're going to look at some criteria. I think because the board doesn't have an opportunity to say yes or no, that we own whether we say yes or no. So those are my thoughts. Thanks.
And I don't know if a consensus should say that this should be an action item, or can we simply go with what their committee has said and what trustee Anderson has said, that we try it this way for a year, and if we feel that we're eliminating too many people as per trustee Wilson's concern, that we could in a year change it yet again. I see trustee Neufeld.
Yeah, I guess the question I have is, because of the history of it, I was here on the board when we initiated this award, and it was because of an individual. That's where the history started, and so my question, I guess, to the board and to the committee was, is if we could just insert the individual back in, how long would that delay the process? And if it's for a short period of time, I think it's worth doing that rather than not having it in there.
Trustee Latham.
Well, my comments don't have anything to do with what you're talking about. It's just that we did meet last year after we had completed the process. And part of the reason for us meeting was that we weren't getting the nominations. We felt like we could do a better job there. So one of the things that we wanted to do was to get traction and to figure out ways of trying to ensure that the information gets out there so that the people know that the opportunity is there to nominate groups and organizations that help out in our schools, and there are many. We're not hearing from them. So I just wanted to clarify that. First of all, that we had started to look at this year previously, and we enlisted the help of the manager of communications and the manager of community partnerships, because we felt that one had the expertise in terms of getting the traction, and the other individual has a really good perspective of a lot of the groups that are out there working in the school. So I wasn't really focused at that time, I think, on individuals, organizations, and the suggestion for this year was that we focus on an organization. And I'm okay with that, and I'm okay with talking about it again next year with the board if you want to expand on it. But I think just in terms of where we're at right now, I'm going to ask, could we go with the recommendations that we have for this year, and then we'll look at it again next year if we want to broaden the scope. That's fine.
So unless we make this an action item, then we either have consensus that we leave it as this way, or we make it an action item and we vote on whether we're going to accept it this way.
Just another comment, I guess my mind works differently. If you're trying to broaden input, including the individual, broadens it. By taking them out, narrows it. So that, for me, doesn't match.
No, I meant in terms of the media and what they can do to connect with schools, because we're not getting, or we didn't last year, we didn't get a lot of nominations last year. Was it 3?
Okay, and one more comment, and then I'm going to ask us what direction we wish to go to. Okay, Trustee Wilson, and then I'm going to see.
Because I'm going to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but I want to talk about the value of the individuals again. I mean, I can put a motion on the floor, except I know it will be defeated, that we insert individuals back into the motion. And part of that is because I know the value of the individuals. The whole traditional system, and because some of them are here, it's reminded me that started with 10 parents at a table, at a kitchen table, having a conversation. So, the power of individuals and how they shift and change our schools is important. So, I mean, I could make that motion to insert it. I'm happy, I do trust Trustee Neufeld will second that. So there you go, to insert individuals.
Can we make the motion could I ask you to make the motion to either support or not what is presently written here?
Well, there would be, I don't want to make a negative motion, so I would,
Okay.
I would move to insert individuals into the proposal.
Okay, well, I guess if we can't come to a consensus, then we need to make this an action item. All right?
Could someone state the motion, please?
I move to insert individuals back into the Community Matters Award.
I second that.
Okay, and we'll have voting buttons.
Not for a minute, you won't.
Not for a minute. How about discussion here on that? Yes.
I just wanted to clarify one point that the rationale that was provided by the committee seemed to make sense at the time for this year, and the motion was put forward and kind of in motion. The criteria for individuals, do we have criteria for individual applicants at this point in time? So in addition to putting the word individual in, other things would have to be adjusted and done for this year. It didn't seem to me like the end of the world to say we can revisit this next year because so much work had been done by the committee, which we appointed to do this work and make a recommendation to us for this year. My last point is that I would like to clarify that by focusing on groups for a year, it in no way implies that individuals are not relevant or important. Of course they are. We all know that they are. We have lots of awards and recognitions for individuals and volunteers at the school level, at the district level. We provide a coach's appreciation and all sorts of things. We do our very best to acknowledge the individuals that help make our school district work. So I do not agree with the philosophy that by for a year focusing on the community groups that work in our schools, that it means we are disrespecting the individuals. So I will not be supporting the motion.
Trustee Rai?
I totally agree with Trustee Pauls. The criteria, if we decide to change it at this last minute, and again, of course, in no way are we not saying that the individuals are not important. That is not the point in this at all. Just for 1 year, we're going to try just with community groups, and I think that is a reasonable ask. And if it does not work and we still get less people nominating, we can always revisit this. It's a board document. We can change it at any time. Changing at the last minute, as it is, it's a little delayed going out to the community. Changing it at the last minute, adding new criteria, meeting the committee meeting again, having new criteria and going forward like that will delay it even more. So for this year, I would support that we just go to the community, to the community organizations, and unfortunately, if individuals are not there, it's not that we don't love them, we don't like them, it's just one of those things that we're trying out.
Okay, so I see our voting buttons and read the motion that the Board of Education approve the insertion of individuals into the Community Matters Award criteria. Yes or no, do you?
Trustee Peterson, Chair Peterson, my apologies. One thing that was omitted from this report was the criteria. Could that please be circulated?
Yes. Yes, we'll, yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you for your indulgence.
all right. And, oh, here we are at our first question period. So this is the time of our agenda where we allow members of our audience to ask questions for 10 minutes worth of questions or less. We ask if you are asking a question that isn't preceded by comment, but simply a question to the board, and please make sure it's related to an agenda item. If you have a question, please step forward, state your name, and fire away.
So I'm still a little bit unclear about timelines. Perhaps you don't know an answer to this question, but what are the expected timelines for decision-making for the ATSS seismic upgrades, just so we get a sense of what we have planned in front of us?
Yeah, and we will be speaking to it, but I think maybe because it's directly asked, I'll turn it over to Secretary Treasurer Bellistek to
You'll see at the,
give us a guess.
at the end of the report, we intend, but it's dependent upon consultant work and those kind of things and what the final options that are considered look like. But our intention is to have that work completed by the end of the school year.
Okay, the consultations.
They work with consultants to, if we have to re-evaluate costs and options and things like that. And there may be some impact related to work they have to do, so.
Okay, let's move on to operations. Third quarter results. That sounds like a basketball game, or I don't know. Third quarter results. Virginia was behind by whatever it was.
So, I guess I apologize again. You see these numbers. We don't round these numbers for you in the financial reports for this purpose. So, you see the actual numbers. Just a reminder that you see in the first column the current year information at the end of March compared to budget, and then to the right you see the prior year. So you see March as of 2018 compared to what the actual results in the 2017-18 fiscal year. So just give you a high summary, because as we begin to prepare the budget for 2019-20, the budget numbers that we have in the current year aren't as important as the forecast of where we think we're going to be. So I'll just highlight for you a couple of things that are different than the budget. So first off, on the revenue side, we expect to be somewhere between $800,000 and $1 million higher in our revenues than expected. It really related to a couple of things. One is some increased international student fees, and the other is increased academy fees. So some of those have contributed to the increase in revenue. On the expenditure side, a couple of factors will see that our net difference in expenditures could be about $1 million less. And so a combination of factors of reduced substitute employee costs. The other factor that is not reflected in here, but because we allow our schools to carry budgets over at the end of the year, any monies that schools have that are unspent would affect the final number. So we anticipate that school budget carryovers will be around $1 million. They were around $1.4 million, I think, last year. So that number's decreasing. If you recall, it wasn't that long ago where school budget carry forwards were about 2.5 million. So at the end of the day, I think we're looking at, as opposed to having that $3.9 million projected deficit, or almost $4 million, it's likely going to be closer to $2 million. So a little bit better position than in the budget. We will reflect that information as we prepare our budget. And in fact, in the next agenda item, as we look at the projected budget for next year, we've factored these changes into that. I will say that your contribution to Eagle Mountain shows up in the interfund transfers, and so this year, next year, and the following year, the anticipated contributions will be transferred through that. If there's a potentially some deviation that results in a lower deficit at the end of this year, we may be in a position at year end to bring to you some consideration around increasing our Eagle Mountain contribution from, instead of the 3-year window to contribute, reduce it to potentially a 2-year window, so that we get it off the books, if you will, and be able to manage budgets differently going forward. So that's just a high-level summary. I'll entertain any questions if there are any.
Trustee Paul.
So I'm not a finance guru, as you know. Can you explain to me why it's better for us to spend the money sooner than stretching it out over 3 years as opposed to 2? How does that benefit us?
Well, it just, only from the purposes of how it would look on the books, is that we would have that contribution sit in, move it to local capital sooner, and then not have, it would essentially allow us to be on budget from what we anticipated this year, and not have to take contributions from future years. So next year's contribution is, I think, $900,000, so it would allow us to not have to take potentially as big a contribution in the next year, and then potentially no contribution or a lesser contribution in the subsequent year.
So there's no interest or anything like
No,
that?
no,
Accruing
no.
has no bearing on this whatsoever?
Absolutely
so we're not. Out any money by
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No, your contribution is fixed to that project.
But am I piggybacking on Trustee Paul's comment? Okay, wouldn't it also then, if we would do it in a shorter period of time, would give us less money to work with in those fiscal years then? You understand what I'm saying?
Well, I'll just give you an example. If, for example, we could put that whole $2.5 million contribution into the current year,
Yeah.
it would benefit us for planning for next year, because we wouldn't have to make a budget allowance for that contribution, provided it doesn't put us into any financial jeopardy in the current year. If we were able to, increase the amount that we were putting into that to meet our commitment, it would just lessen the burden in future years' budgets.
Yes, but in those years that you're stretching it out, you'd have more money to put into other areas.
Other areas, yes, that's exactly why.
That's what I was trying to get. Thank you.
For sure.
Okay. Yes, Trustee Rai.
So, under the end of March, we are right now showing a surplus of 2.2 million, and that you're anticipating in the next 3 months to turn into a deficit of 2 million.
potentially a deficit of 2 million.
Okay, so we're looking at that over the next,
And that has to do with grant, timing of grant payments too,
okay.
Trustee Wright? And also, at this point in time, we've received almost 100%, or potentially more than 100% of the international student revenue. Some of it may be deferred to next year,
Okay.
but if you look at the international student revenue there, that's more than 100%. I know it's more than 100% that we've collected. The final number will likely be somewhat less than that because some of it will be deferred to a future year.
So what it looks like that over the last year we had increased it by about 500,000,
International will be about a $300,000 increase from last year.
and that you're anticipating is for next year. So we're sort of at level.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Trustee Wilson.
Thank you. Secretary Treasurer Belisek, through the chair, of course. We're not at 7.6, but 7.6 talks about a reduction in our grant for this year. That would be the enrollment audit. Where is that reflected in here?
It's reflected in the first line provincial grants, Ministry of Education. That was factored in when we did the amended budget in February, so that had already been factored into that budget number. So if you look at the budget of $191,885,000, that was already that audit impact had already been adjusted from there.
Thank you.
Okay, you're on a roll. How about, let's talk about the 2019-20 preliminary budget.
All right. Do you have that? So a couple of staff reports there for you. One is the summary of the budget information. I've given you a copy of the operating grant summary and a detail printout of the operating grant. And then I also included for you a summary of the strategic initiatives where funding was allocated last year. And so those are the things that are under review, and the superintendent has scheduled some strategic review meetings for staff and for those people responsible for some of the projects and actions that take place supporting the strategic plan for the next couple of weeks. So you'll see some information coming shortly to either board committees or to public board meetings. Just a quick walk through the staff report. First, you've seen the guiding principles there, and the one that I will just focus on are the last two that talk about surplus and reserves and maintaining strong fiscal management policies. I think that when we look at the budget where we're at this year, despite potentially our better than expected results in the current year, we need to have a look at that big financial picture of where we're at. So in the budget estimates that you're going to see in a moment, a number of assumptions have been made. I've listed them for you. Right now we're forecasting a student increase of about 92 students. We will lock that down by the end of this month so that schools will have completed their staffing processes, and through that whole work in the next couple of weeks, if there are adjustments to a school's enrollment, we'll make them and we'll adjust staffing accordingly. It's our anticipation when we develop the budget that any adjustments or any changes that happen as a result of our final enrollments in September 30th, that the ministry would fund those at the current published rates. So if their enrollment is 100 students higher, that those 100 students would be funded at the same rates as the current students in the preliminary budget. And we also anticipate that any cost related to implementation of the 2001 Teacher Collective Agreement will be fully funded from the ministry. A couple of the changes that are being proposed, and you'll see these in greater detail, is looking at one of the areas that you funded from your reserves or from your surplus in the past, is that's the strong starts that the board operates. And we're proposing that rather than funding that from surplus, that going forward it become just part of general operations. So it'll have its own budget. And the budget estimates you're going to see also don't include any adjustments for inflationary factors. So inflation is absorbed within existing allocations in people's budgets, with the exception, of course, of salaries. So we've factored in the cost of unionized salary increases, which come into effect in May, and those will be factored in for next year's budget. So the next, just a quick picture of what that enrollment looks like. Enrollment is still increasing across the district. And again, I think that we look at that longer term enrollment, and that line is on a fairly steady increase going up. So capacity issues again in the district are of concern to us. I talked about the enrollment grant, or the operating grant, pardon me. This is just a summary of changes to the operating grant from our current year numbers to what we project for next year. And so a total operating grant increase of just under $4.5 million. But a couple of highlights in there. One of them is a couple areas within that operating grant direct money into specific areas. One of them is Aboriginal funding. So the per student increase in funding for Aboriginal students is increased. That increases the Aboriginal target by about $500,000 for us. And there's also an increase in a couple of the special education rates that drive the special ed funds up about $1.6 million. And those enrollments in special ed have increased a little bit, but not to the extent that would drive a $1.6 million change in total funding. So that's it for the operating grant. The budget estimates now, if we look at the 2019-20 column, I already talked about our deficit for the current year. It's projected in the budget at $3.9 million. Likely the next time you'll see this, that column will change from a budget column to a forecast column. And we'll have a number that is likely something around $1.9 or $2 million projected deficit. So the budget for 2019-20 is right now showing a projected deficit of $1.7 million. The bigger factor to look at is what is below it, as the impact potentially on our overall accumulated surplus. And while that $3.2 million number in the bottom right column of accumulated surplus potentially could be $5.2 million, it is still getting within that area of concern, and I'll highlight that on the next couple of slides. So I raise that because we've typically looked at our surplus as that indicator of financial health, and have talked about an unrestricted accumulated surplus of somewhere between 2 and 3% of the operating budget. So that is somewhere between $3.8 and $5.8 million of an unrestricted surplus. So that does not count anything that you put a restriction on. It does not count things like school budget carry forwards. That is a restricted amount that is set by the board. We have restricted amounts that we're required to hold. For example, if we don't spend all of our Aboriginal funding in a given year, that is a restricted amount that shows up in our statements. But we can't spend that on anything else. That's a ministry restriction. So it's more of an external restriction. You have some internal restrictions on your money. So we're talking about, in this regard, the 3.8 to 5.8 is money that is unrestricted. What is stuff there to cover us, in our rainy day fund? So one of the issues we had this year was that pipeline explosion in the fall. That has resulted in us having our natural gas costs escalate to be about $400,000 over budget, primarily due because of the rates of natural gas. And we talked about that in a number of meetings throughout the winter, what we were seeing in our natural gas rates. So that is the purpose of an unrestricted surplus, is that we don't have to race out to other areas of our budget and make changes mid-year to adjust for something that is unforeseen. So if we look at what that would mean, our unrestricted surplus right now, we would forecast potentially $3 million at the end of June of 2019. If schools have a $1 million carry forward, that doesn't affect that $3 million unrestricted amount. So that would go up into the school district restricted amounts. And so we see the effects of the 2019-20 operations, and then the projected unrestricted surplus of $1.3 million at the end of 2019-20. That is what is of concern. And so the next month and a half work is around how do we maintain our financial health, how do we protect some of that so that we don't live on that edge, if you will. So I talked about you know, a huge part of our budget work is focused. While we do have to focus on the numbers and where we're spending our money and what are some of the financial drivers, what really drives the budget is our work and our strategic plan. So there's 11 current goals, as you know. There's 25 objectives. There's over 90 projects and actions that are currently under review, and those will come forward to you in the next month or so. And I would suggest that it wouldn't be a bad idea for you to look through that information from last year. It actually had the 2000, you know, the preliminary amounts from prior years in those two columns, and then the amounts we allocated in last year's budget. I think it would be worthwhile for you to just, you know, refamiliarize yourself with that process, because this will come back to you shortly. So the upcoming meetings are listed there for you. I won't read them, but between staff reviews of the budget and public information meetings and meetings with the board, our intention is on June 18th to have a final budget brought forward for your approval. So I'll entertain any questions.
First of all, thank you for that information. Questions, comments? Yes.
Question. Yeah, thank you, Chair Peterson. A quick question regarding, we said the natural gas was an increase of 400,000. If we look at the carbon tax that the province is putting on and the federal government's going to be putting on, how much increase would it be for our vehicles to run, our buses to run, if that increases, let's say, 10 cents a litre? I mean, that's, so looking at $1.3 million could be blown in no time flat.
Yeah, typically in a year we put contingencies in places for some things like that. So for estimated fuel use, and we'll make an estimate for some fluctuation in those kind of things. We do the same with natural gas, but we just didn't see. We're anticipating an issue like we had this year, where sometimes the price of natural gas was 40 times higher on a given day than it was the previous day. So there were some significant changes to the rates that, all of that didn't impact us, but there were some changes that did impact us significantly along the way.
Others? Okay, more work to come. And if questions, again, we'll have you hold it to our question period, please. Okay? All right. Probably the most important topic for our audience is next, the Abbotsford Traditional Secondary School Project Planning Update. And will you introduce?
I'll let Ray start.
Ray, you'll start, okay?
Yeah, I first of all want to see if I can find the staff report. I wanted to touch base with you on the consultation feedback and just give a summary to you. So paper feedback collected during the period that we had announced that we would collect the paper forms. We received around 400 documents, and the preferences, they were given some options around, you know, which option do you approve, temporary accommodations at Rick Hansen or at ATSS. Almost 99% wanted the temporary accommodations at ATSS. There was slightly more than 1% at Rick Hansen. We had online feedback collected as well, so there was 370 online responses. And in those online responses, 88% preferred the temporary accommodations at ATSS, with the balance either at Rick Hansen or some other board decision. So I guess for the public's information, trustees have been provided actually hard copies or electronic copies of all of the documents. So they've got one PDF that has 400 pages in it, and another PDF that has 25 pages that summarizes the 370
Thank you
online
for the
responses.
many.
No, it's good.
So, and that is part of our typical process when we do a public consultation like that, is that the feedback gets directly to trustees, so.
Sorry.
So that's it as far as the information gathered as part of that consultation and feedback on temporary accommodations.
So then the other piece of this was then what based on the feedback and the presentation that was made, what are the potential options that are that need to be considered? The board will recall that the task wasn't for the board at this point to make a decision. The task was for us to make a business case for the ministry to make the decision. And so part of the task is to explore all the options, to cost those options, and then to paint a business case for that. And because at the end of the day, this is a decision ultimately that the Ministry of Education would have to make based on recommendations that would come from the business case that would be submitted from this board. So I asked Mr. Bondi, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Schools, to work with Mr. Hildebrandt to identify some of the possible options that would be contemplated as a part of the business case that would ultimately be submitted to the ministry. So I'll invite you up just to walk us through some of those options and talk us through some of the pros and cons associated with each one.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairperson, Pearson, trustees. I will tell you, in the 2 weeks I've been looking at this, no stone has been left unturned. Who knew that there was a room underneath C-150 was actually a wrestling room that could be converted into a classroom? So we've been sniffing out everything we can in terms of finding spaces. So I just want to read you the report. We've, as a follow-up to the consultation on March 13th, we've pursued options for temporary accommodation, as well as options that would retain all students at ATSS during the planning for the seismic project. And what I'd like to present to you tonight are the 6 options that we're putting forward from which to present to the ministry and to see which one is the most viable for us moving forward. So just a quick overview. To accommodate all the students at ATSS during seismic renovation, there's a need for 17 classrooms, a tech ed classroom, a band room, as well as an office space and a staff prep room. The total space requirement would be 21 rooms. However, with the initiation of phase 1 of the seismic project, there's not going to be enough classroom space to accommodate all the students during the regular school day. So during phase 1 and phase 2 of the seismic project, there's a timeline of about 14 to 18 months and up to 3 semesters. During that time, only 15 spaces will be available, and that's 6 below the required need for the school. Included in this total are 2 presently unused Abbotsford Traditional Middle School classrooms. During the phase, to have all students remain at ABC, at Abbey Traditional, the Learning Commons will be moved to a smaller classroom space because the Learning Commons will be converted into an ATSS office, which will house administration and counseling. All classrooms will be in use during teacher prep blocks, which will equate to 1 additional room in total. Moreover, educational programming will be compromised in that during phase 1 and 2 of the seismic renovation, regardless of the option chosen, technical education classes will not be offered on site, and it will not be possible to deliver all physical education classes within a gym during the regular scheduled school day. So option 1 is all students remain at Abbey Traditional within a regular timetable. In this option, there's not enough classroom space in the building for all students to attend during the regular day. If this option is to be pursued, a total of 6 portables will be required. The pros for this one is that all students will remain in the same physical space. The cons is that the reduced building space is going to impact student movement during the day and place a strain on space during non-instructional time. Access to basic services like washrooms and cafeteria will be impacted. Typical access to the gym will be compromised, which means physical education classes may have to take place outside of the school building. Technical education classes, as I mentioned, will not be available on site, and the project timeline is slightly increased. Option 2 is all students remain at Abbey Traditional within an extended day. An extended day would have to be negotiated with the ADTA, and that the proposal would contravene Article D23 of the collective agreement. Now, I heard one parent, I know which one mentioned Surrey and Elgin Park, they have different language in their collective agreement. When I was principal at Van Tech and oversaw, vice principal, and oversaw the seismic renovation there, we had different language as well. An extended day would mean a staggered start to the day here, but at present, with our collective agreement, we can start no earlier than 8 and no later than 9:30. And we cannot provide continuous education for more than 6.5 hours. If we're talking about a staggered start at ATSS, we're talking about almost noon to push it to 5. Now, although ATSS students would have access to all classrooms if an extended day is offered, there still will be a need for some portables in the times of the day when all students are present. On the report, it says 6 portables, but this can vary and can be minimized based on how late a staggered start would be. But again, we need ADTA approval for that. The cons, again, during times when all students are in session, capacity will be compromised. Again, technical education classes will still not be available on site. With a staggered start, extracurricular sports practices and games for both ATMS and ATSS will be rescheduled in the evening to accommodate PE instruction. Literally, that would mean no home games for a couple of years, and the portable is still required. Option 3.
Question.
Yes, go ahead. And I'm gonna suggest that, that if we, let's let you.
Stop in between options?
Yeah, let's stop in between. Trustee
Just want to
Neufeld.
clarify on the first option, you talked about how it would impact the extended building of the building. Would this one as well?
Yes,
It's not stated there, so it would as well.
This one would, in the crossover time, when everyone is in the same building at the same time, depending on staggered start,
right,
it would. Okay. If the staggered start was much later, then it would minimize. You would still need portables, but not as many as 6.
Okay, thank you.
And that's all dependent on time start.
Okay. Yes, Trustee Wilson.
So in terms of the project timeline is increased, could you give an estimate of a from to? Because don't expect an exact number, but there's a big difference between 2 months and 6 months, say, or a year. And you say the number of portables would be fewer, but what would that number might be?
It would be a maximum of 6, a minimum of 2.
For the portables now?
Yes.
For the month, the extension?
That I would have to go to Ray.
So if the entire site is cleared off and there's nobody in the secondary building at all, it's an 19-month construction window. If there's a phasing schedule involved, and it would depend on any one of these options, what might impact the phasing. But the phasing schedule would range somewhere between 26 and 30 months.
Not mentioned in the report, the nice thing is that if they do stay, the band and music will still be offered. Just be a walkway along the outside to get to the band room, because that's later on. It's a phase 4. Option 3 is grade 11 and 12 students attend Rick Katzen Secondary School. ATSS students would remain as a cohort and receive instruction from ATSS teachers. Coordination of the timetable and the staffing would be a collaborative effort between Abbey Traditional and Rick Hansen administrative teams. In terms of extracurricular sports teams, because I know that came up in some of the comments, ATSS would still retain their school identity while making use of the Rick Hansen athletic facilities. Note that although there'll be more space at ATMS and ATSS, PE classes at ATSS for grade 9 and 10 students will still need to be offered off timetable, either in the morning or the afternoon. The pros to this one is that all senior students would receive access to technical education courses on site. There are a lot of students, particularly male students, that are dependent on those credits for graduation. More space would open up at ATSS and ATMS, minimizing scheduling conflicts, and no portables would be required. The cons would be, of course, stress on the elective areas, and stress on the elective areas in gym spaces, because rather than having full classes of 30 that are amalgamated between the two, by running 2 separate cohorts, you may have classes of 24 and 25 throughout, and so you're not maximizing space. Some PE classes will still have to run off timetable, but that's common for senior PE courses throughout the district with strength and conditioning and off timetable courses either in the morning or the afternoon. So that would be no different at Hampton than it would be at Abbotsford, Abbey Senior, or Yale or Bateman. A con would be the staff having to work in two schools. Although they would be delivering, the English teacher would be delivering classes to the seniors over at Rick Hansen, he or she may have to go back to ATSS the next day to deliver the junior classes. And it was mentioned as well in the session back on March 13th, possible conflict between senior students. There's a lot of baggage that kids accumulate over the years, and a lot of relationships that go sour and go strong. And so it usually is a little more dominant or predominant with senior students than it is with junior students. Option 4, grade 9 and 10 students attend Rick Hansen Secondary School. The overview for this option remains the same as option 3. The pros here is that all junior students would receive access to technical education courses on site, thereby ensuring the long-term viability of these elective offerings once the seismic project is completed. History will tell you in schools that if students in grade 9 and 10 do not take elective courses and do not take woodwork or metal, they will not go back there in grade 11 and 12. More space, again, would open up at ATSS and ATMS. No portables required, and younger students could prove to be an easier transition. The cons are the same, the exact same as the option 3. The only con that's unique here is if the 11s and 12s went to Rick Hansen, they would graduate out as ATSS students at Rick Hansen. The grade 9s and 10s, particularly the 9s, would be going into grade 11. The seismic would more than likely be close to finishing the second semester. At that point, the question will be, will they return, or will they remain at Rick Hansen as traditional kids? The upside to that, and the reason I say that is the electives that will be offered at Rick Hansen are much more robust because of the schools of science and business, their internships, and their partnerships with UFV. And so access to electives, again, is much more robust than it is at Abbey Traditional. So that could play into a decision.
Question, comments?
Yeah, just a quick question. Why would there be more electives at Rick Hansen than ATSS?
Population, there's more kids.
Okay.
The uniqueness of the programs, because no course is taught in isolation there, it's all interdisciplinary and project-based. Because of the internships with the community where kids go off and work for paid internship for 2 weeks in grade 12. It opens up to different types of electives, so they're very unique to Hansen and to the schools of science and business.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, others? Okay.
Option 5 is a dual offering, academic and elective courses at Rick Hansen. This option is a variation of option 3 and 4, in which students would receive their academic courses within a traditional framework, but be integrated into the regular Rick Hansen population for their electives. The pros, all junior and senior students receive access to technical education courses on site. More space again in Abbey Traditional, Abbey Middle, Traditional Middle, no portables required, but increases in elective enrollment, thereby increasing number of elective offerings. It ensures that traditional tenets are still being taught. It provides access to electives and also first-year courses at University of Fraser Valley that are unique to Rick Hansen. Fewer teachers would need to move schools. The other pro is that the teachers from Abbey Traditional would receive professional development in project-based learning, as well as engaging in interdisciplinary team teaching, which is one of the tenets at Rick Hansen. And the nice thing about all those points is that they are big facets of our secondary operational plan. The cons, PE still have to run off timetable. Students may choose not to return to Abbey Traditional, and then electives are not being offered as strictly traditional course offerings. And the last option is option 6, which, although not presented at our public forum, we put forward anyways, again, to leave no stone unturned. And option 6 is the incoming grade 6 students at Abbey Traditional would attend their catchment school and limit grade 9 enrollment to existing grade 8 Abbey Traditional middle students. The latter part of this option, the grade 8 Abbey Traditional middle students, is really a non-issue. Of the 114 who are registered for next year, 110 are from Abbey Traditional. This option, very much like option 3 and 4, would provide space at ATSS, thereby minimizing scheduling conflicts between the two schools. The option would also minimize the impact of physical disruption on the youngest learners during the seismic renovation. For those of you who haven't been through a seismic renovation, I went through 2 years at Van Tech. It's a loud and noisy and messy thing, and you don't realize how messy and noisy it is until it's complete, and you walk into your regular classroom and you feel like you were in a war zone for 2 years. It's loud and it's tough. It's tough. This option, by doing this, will free up 4 classrooms. 2 portables will still be required. Younger students seamlessly integrated as part of their transition to middle schools. More space would open up, and all ATSS students would remain in the same physical space. The cons, again, reduce building space during the day, during non-instructional time, the access to basic services, technical education classes still not available, portables will still be required, and the middle school students may not return. And lastly, the other consideration related to all the options is combining ATSS, and I should say ATMS and ATSS into one school with one administrative team, 3 administrators, that results in an increase of instructional space. What I mean by that is rather than having 2 offices, 2 staff rooms, and 2 prep rooms, you would have 2 counseling centers, you would have 1 for the school, 1 office, 1 admin team, which would thereby increase learning spaces and instructional classrooms. That's it.
Trustee Pauls.
Can you clarify for us how much space that would free up in terms of classroom if that amalgamation happened with the combined?
Off the top of my head, the office space right now at ATMS would provide a minimum of 3 classrooms.
Okay, and so that would make that.
We converted the office space right now at ATMS, we would have 3 more classrooms.
Which would mean only 3 more portables would be needed during the renovation.
Yes.
And so that model then would look like how we run Asia Sumas, with the middle and secondary combined with 1 administrative team.
Yes, and then the whole administrative team would go into the present learning commons, and we would remodel that for temporary with 3 administrators, and we would amalgamate the secretarial staff and the counselors.
Trustee Rai.
The same question of Trustee Pauls. How, like, you have put this other concentration moving to 1 office, 1 staff room, and you said maybe 3 more classrooms can be accommodated there.
Generally, yeah.
Generally, roughly.
Yep.
How difficult it would be, because we are in here. It looks like you're talking about having this after the fact, but if we want to do it in the beginning, before the how feasible it is, and how
Dale, Ray could speak to it, but I've asked Dale to put up office spaces before.
Right.
Like at Rick Hansen, put a couple of offices there, and it can be done in the summer.
it can be done in the summer.
Yeah.
So the option of having 3 more classrooms and maybe 2 to 3 less portables is there as an option.
Yeah.
And keeping
But then
everybody
it would have staffing implications as well.
and keeping everybody together
Yes. You would need 3 more portables.
at
But,
ATSS.
and the options there, you would need 3 portals, but then all those cons would still be there in terms of no tech ed courses, really tight space, access to washrooms, cafeteria, and all that. I mean, you can even consider that a staggered start as well.
Mr. Neufeld.
So just clarify for me, so I understand, and also the public, so if grade 11 and 12 students don't take tech ed courses, they can't graduate?
No, they can graduate. You only need 1 FA or A or 1 fine arts or applied skills. The reality is there's a lot of, and I don't want to be gender biased here, but there's a lot of boys who are really depending on 8 credits of metalwork or woodwork, or sometimes they'll do woodwork 11, construction 11A, carpentry finishing 12B. They'll get like 12 credits in woodwork in reality.
Towards their
graduation.
Okay. Right? So they would have to make it up with what?
Like if there's limited options.
If there's limited options, and academics usually isn't their strong suits, they would have to, community service, work experience, there are other things they can do for credit. They can do some online courses as well. They have peer mentorship as well. There's other courses. The issue there is student engagement.
Right.
You're asking boys who are really good at and want to be there to go engage in something that involves soft skills that they may not have.
Thank you.
So, some next steps. We have some next steps in this process.
Yeah, so as we talked about at the public meeting, one of the things that drives all of this is enrollments. So we will go through some further steps to validate our enrollment projections. Once we do that, I think that it's important for us to look at what is the overall capacity requirements for this facility going forward. If we look at things that Mr. Bondi has presented relative to the one school, one administration office, what are the total effects of doing things like that, and what should the capacity of the combined campus be? Right now it's 1,000. Should it stay at 1,000? Should it be reduced? And if it's reduced, to what number is it reduced? So that affects the scope of work in a potential project going forward. So we need to decide on that capacity piece, evaluate any changes to the scope of work, get consultants to reevaluate costs and project timelines and things like that for us, and then make our submission back to you so that we can make that business case to the ministry. So it's really about putting the fine touches to what the business case is. The ministry really won't care a whole lot about tech ed courses and where we offer PE classes and all those kind of things. So you won't see that information coming forward in the project definition report. There's just not a place other than a high-level description of the program at the school. So you won't typically see that in a project definition report, particularly for a seismic project. But what you will see is what is the enrollment, what is the capacity, what are we doing to address the seismic issues. If, for example, you decided to reduce capacity of the site, what would be demolished? Would you demolish lots of it and then rebuild smaller? I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's the work for consultants to look at. So,
Trustee Wilson.
I actually want to go off of what you just mentioned about demolishing and some part of the building and right-sizing it, as it were, because that's not an option that's presented in here. Could you tell us what that might look like? I know you said it's a consultant's work, but I'm very curious.
well, if you looked at the projected enrollments that showed the combined schools being under 600, so you might set a capacity, and if you looked, in that 10-year, 20-year window, I mean, 20 years is getting way out there. But if you look out and say if we can live with a capacity of 700 students, you would design now, you look at the school, how many rooms do we have available in the existing site? What needs seismic renovation, what doesn't? And then the consultants would typically look at what spaces can we save and what spaces are easiest not to seismically retrofit.
So, can I keep going on that?
Yes.
A number of years ago, a couple different things. They added a board prior to when I first sat, prior to 2005, was able to work around some of the issues of seismic and upgrades and updates and things and create ATMS. ATMS is really not that old, and it's a fairly new building in all consideration. With Abbotsford Senior, that's a retrofit, that's an addition. They maintained an older addition and they added on to the building. So I'm curious about, we haven't gone too far into this conversation, but I know it's been raised in the past, and I am curious about what it might look like if we did that, if we considered a business case where we right-sized the building and we could actually move forward with the seismic wrapped into an actual addition, because it's one building. It would be in addition to an existing wing of the building. And where that might go, what would that look like?
Yeah, it would only be an addition if virtually all of the existing secondary was demolished.
No,
Right.
well, it wasn't with Abbotsford Senior, but
No, but, really a couple of different projects. I mean, in Abby Senior's case, we were lobbying for a bigger site because we knew our forecast at Abby Senior was showing increasing enrollments. And back at the day, the ministry had decided that they were capping our project at 1,100 students? We were asking for bigger. It was pre my time, but I know the district of the day was asking for a bigger site. For increased
no,
capacity.
but we reached an agreement. It doesn't mean we can't negotiate.
No, fair enough. The ministry has confirmed with me that in this case, I will say back in that year, that was 2008, and I was in a district where we had significant seismic, and we were able to turn a seismic retrofit into 2 brand new schools. What government learned from that was, and the policy now changed to, and I was reminded today talking to the ministry, is that we want the lowest cost option. So the lowest cost option typically isn't a demolition, new construction, unless it's affecting capacity in some way. So if we're reducing 400 seats out of a school and creating 200, I don't know what the numbers might look like in that regard. So taking the work that Assistant Superintendent Bondi has done and looking at what are some of the other options that deal with the temporary accommodation issue, but what are some of the other options to create a valid business case, including like the one administration thing, will just require some additional work. And like I say, that's where the consultants have to go and look at what parts of the building are we going to recommend a lower capacity, and then they'll have to look at it won't be as easy as demolishing the worst parts of the building. It'll be looking at what programs, because there's still requirements in the design aid sheets for any project that we have to accommodate a middle secondary school. There has to be tech ed shops, there has to be these kind of spaces available. So it won't be as easy as just saying, this would be the easiest part to demolish on the end of the building. Because you might not be able to recreate it at a reasonable cost.
I understand. So my last question, because we are, the 7 of us are the stewards of public money at the end of the day. It is sometimes about the almighty dollar, but what I want to ask is, when is the last time we did do any upgrades to the facility?
Outside of basic maintenance, I don't know that there's been any major sort of capital work done to the school.
No AFG?
Oh, I think there's potentially AFG money. I'm just not sure of any major costs. We haven't replaced boilers. We haven't replaced a roof, kind of thing.
A couple of comments, if I could. The first one was related to the topic you were just talking about, and that is, isn't the ministry going to decide basically the numbers for that school? Or was it going to us to?
Which numbers?
The numbers of capacity for that building. Because if it's capacity right now for how many? 600? 600 for that?
Combined capacity is.
Okay, so are they not going to say, well, hang on, you've had 400 for how many years? We're not going to put 600, we're not going to make space for 600, we're going to make space for 400.
If you looked back to their letter they sent us last February, that's what they basically said.
Okay. So it's not going to be necessarily our decision, it's going to be theirs.
Is they said that we needed to evaluate whether this was needed capacity in the district to begin with. So it's one thing to choose the lowest cost option, and then I think making a reasonable business case in this regard is going to mean potentially downsizing. I think that if we look at making that footprint a little bit smaller, trying to keep that budget, right now it's getting close to $20 million on the original option 1, right? If we can keep that under that $20 million mark, it will be attractive for the ministry. And remember, when we submit the business case, it's not a submission to them, and then they don't just respond back and say, here's what our response is. It's, if you think back to Eagle Mountain, we had, I think, 20 different submissions back and forth between the ministry and us on development of the project definition report for Eagle Mountain. And that's a brand new school, and there's nothing to talk about really. It's just a new building on a bare piece of property. So in this way, we'll have the same back and forth with the ministry about the right sizing, you know, what is a reasonable kind of scope look like once we have sort of narrowed it down between like option 1 and option 2, once we get it down to that.
Okay. 2 clarifying questions if I could, and that comes with the consultation that's taken place so far. And one is, what makes this seismic different than, let's say, the seismic to Mowat or to Yale?
Well, Yale's a better example because it's more current. We put, I can't remember how many portables, the board's contribution to portables for the Yale seismic project was just under $900,000. But there was no adjacent space to put those students in. So when you do the surrounding school analysis, the students at Yale there was no place to accommodate them at Bateman or at Abbey Senior. So that is part of the requirement when the ministry looks at these projects. So ministry will fund temporary accommodations provided there's not another alternative that is reasonable. So what they've identified for us in this case is that, listen, you've got a school within the reasonable catchment area that could accommodate these students. So that is why the notion of them not funding temporary accommodations has come into play. If Rick Hansen was full, they would fund temporary accommodations because we'd have no place to put the students during construction. But so that's why the temporary accommodations the ministry suggested, hey, you've got space in an adjacent school.
A second question, if I could, for clarification, is the repair, why we deferred repairs to ATSS, waiting for seismic first rather than doing those. Can you clarify that for us?
Yeah, well, I mean, this, you know, it kind of goes back to this project was put on the books on the heels of Abbey Senior. So our intention was, back in the day, was to get a seismic project and a retrofit of the facility because there were a number of issues related to building envelope that need to be addressed. Unfortunately, we've hit a time when lowest cost option for seismic retrofit only is the policy of the day. The ministry is trying to complete many of these seismic projects that have been on the books for many years across the province. We've done more seismic projects, and we're getting to the end of our seismic work. So
maybe if I could ask it a different way. If we would have done repairs to ATSS previous, now to seismic, we'd have to undo all that and redo it, is what you're saying.
Some of them didn't make a lot of sense because
that's what I want, yeah.
There's a lot of banging and shaking, and you know, you've been through seismic, you know what some of this is like. It's very disruptive. I mean, all of the windows in that 2-story building need to come out.
Right.
They need to be replaced.
Yeah.
And the ministry, I don't think will fund them because they can be put back. Well, we're not putting them back. The building envelope needs some work. So I think that we can look at, we need to prioritize those other repairs. So I've asked Dale to prioritize, what is the most urgent part of those building improvements that we need to do? And then once we prioritize them, we can, instead of saying it's $5 million, what is the first $1 million? And then look at, is this money we can get from AFG? Is it our next year's submission on school enhancement program? We just did building envelope at Dormick Park. Now, it wasn't anywhere near the scope that this school is, but typically that's what some of those projects are for, like school enhancement money is for those kind of things that are minor but capital in nature.
And that's taking money out of the rest of the district to put into this.
Yeah, we make those decisions all the time though. I mean, the same with AFG. We have that allocation of annual facility grant money, and we have facilities have a strategy of how they're spending it over the next number of years. Dale isn't a 1-year kind of guy that just allocates money for next year. He's got the next 5 or 8 years mapped out as to which floors and roofs and things like that need to be replaced.
Okay, thank you for answering my questions. I've been gone for 4 years. I'm trying to catch up. Okay, well, thank you, Assistant Superintendent Bondi, for you and your team, but I know it fell on your shoulders, and that's great information you provided for us, so thank you very much. Okay, one more item under operations, 2018-2019 K-12 regular enrollment compliance audit final report. Doo-dah.
Well, it may not be the final report because I think we're going to appeal some of this report. This is something that happens on a regular basis. The ministry annually audits school districts. We've been subject to a number of audits over the years. Typically, they look for, like I say, all the assurances around the paperwork and things like that. This year, they did the audit at Abbey Senior Secondary, Rick Hansen, and Bakerview. And as a result of their audit, there's a $234,000 funding reduction that is being applied to this year's budget based on the number of FTE and things that they just sometimes couldn't. It was as simple as the page where the students signed in for a program wasn't dated. And so the ministry disallowed those FTE in the program because the requirement was these certain things have to be completed. And I get it. Even though I think we could reasonably demonstrate that it was, these students were taking the course, it was one of those technicalities. And so that's the nature of our appeal. We are going to appeal some of these, and I don't know if the superintendent has any more he wants to.
Yeah, I mean, you see on the list the areas that in an enrollment audit they look at. They check if where the student is ordinarily resident. They actually reside here. They typically look at school alternate programs. In this case, Bakerview is one of the schools. ELL is one of the things. Aboriginal education, student exchanges, and partnership with post-secondary. So the area where, I'll say I have some concerns. I mean, we have this amazing career education programs in this district, and things like, a form not being dated would say that, well, the kid is not in the course, which I get it, but as you know, we have the most robust career education program in the province, and the greatest number of kids on work experience. And so in this particular case, they come around, they want to know a kid who's out on the work site, who's supervising it, and did you date the time when you went and visited the student? Well, there are things like that, and they're auditors, they have a job to do, and they're very clear about what the expectations are. So at a couple of the sites, we just felt that because we just know about the strength of the program, that these are technicalities that I don't think they really need to attend to. So it's our intention to deal with what is probably a total of 6 FTEs associated with career education, which I just think, given the quality of the program and what goes on, that these technicalities are not, I don't think it serves the district well, so I think we're just going to appeal those.
We all love auditors. Yes.
Yeah, they have a job to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely respect it, right? So.
Okay, comments, questions? If not, I see no committee reports. So that brings us to trustee announcements. Oh, what? We got one more. Where'd it go?
Dunacart.
Oh, Dunacart. Yes, Dunacart. Yes. So we've had some contact from some community members regarding some murals that were left in Dunac Elementary School when it was closed, and there was some recent action around the school because they were cleaning some of the things out of the building that are stored in there, and some people were concerned about this art. We've since located the art that was in question, and I think we're wanting to determine what we might do with that. But it's good history. I've seen one of the pieces. Another one is hidden behind some plywood that I haven't seen. In fact, Trustee Pauls and I were down rummaging around to find it, and we found it along with some other things. But I think we are looking for a recommendation upon where we might put that. So, Trustee Wilson.
Thank you, Chair Peterson. It was, I also received some communication in regards to the activity around Dunac and 2 pieces of art that were installed in the school, one of them in a lower room, which was a schoolhouse with some original students, and another which was an official photo of a former Reeve who's since passed on. And they were very curious and worried and concerned about what might happen to those two pieces, those two installations. The one of the official photo that is from the city archives is currently behind some plywood that's in the hallway in what used to be the old city hall portion of the school, which as we know has had several additions. And then the other one, of course, is stored in the office, and there are also 3 pieces of art that have plaques on them in memoriam. And a former PAC president, Mrs. Lindsay Babineau, who's also a retired teacher, she contacted me in regards to, after this was all discovered, to give me some of the history of these. The funding for these 2 creations from Kimmy's Creations was provided by matching funds between the Duna PAC and Abbotsford Community Foundation, which was then known as the Abbotsford Matt Squeezin Foundation, in 1994, and they for the tune of $750 each, so $1,500. And they're very concerned. Mrs. Babineau said she would like to take those and store them if there was nowhere else to go. However, the Reach, Miss Chris Folds, who is all of a sudden her position, she's an archivist for these types of things in our community. She's very interested and she would like to receive those. Since it is what is the primary concern whenever this comes up, that there's somebody in the school doing something, I would recommend that we provide all of the pieces, all 5 pieces, to the Reach Gallery and Museum. The 3 pieces of art were student memorials to a teacher who had died tragically in a car accident, and it was the style of art, drawings, paintings that she used to use with her students, and they were left in the building. Apparently the family's no longer here. So I would like to recommend that we move those to the Reach Gallery and Museum.
And this isn't an action item, and I don't think it has to be. I think that we all agree that that's a good spot. So I guess we'd ask staff to remove that hunk of plywood and find that other piece of art and then make arrangements for it to get to the Reach. All right.
Very good.
Thank you.
That would be honoring for them.
Yeah, I think that's hey. Okay, now trustee announcements. And then a question period.
Well, I'll go.
Okay.
Just a couple of quick things. I attended the ARJA meeting, the Restorative Justice organization. It's the first time that I've gone, and it's always interesting. You always learn new things. And very welcoming group, and very busy and active in the community. And so that was interesting for me to go. So is this your committee?
It is.
Oh, okay. So I was there on your behalf.
Thank you.
And ate lunch.
Yeah.
And the other, we had a book launch at the Reach on Thursday evening, and that was B. Silver's book, which you each have a copy of.
Thank you.
Thanks to our board chair. And I was asked to say a few words, and yes, it's an interesting read. This B. Silver is one of our elders, and she has written a book about her time in residential school. And it's connected actually to a project that started at Robert Bateman Secondary School. They have an arts and activism course, and it's been really an unbelievable project because it started probably 18 months ago. And it started with the students working with B. Silver, listening to her story, and creating art around her story. And they're all different aspects of her story. And the artwork, it goes on tour. And so it was at the Reach with us on Thursday night, which was really cool because a lot of us have seen it in different locations around the city or at the Longhouse. And so this is kind of, I guess, the culmination of the project is the printing of B. Silver's book. So it was, it was a really, and it's so nice to have a facility like the Reach to be able to do things like this. So they certainly embrace different aspects of our community and are very inviting. So yeah, it's great.
And just, it was nice for us to be able to have them personally signed
Yes,
by Beatrice as well. So she was very gracious with that.
it was.
Okay, others?
This is not related to district work, but I did visit several schools in South America when I was there. I was in Paraguay for 2 weeks with 5 of my brothers. We were born out there, and just so for your information, in the public school system, children who speak Low German at home learn High German from kindergarten to grade 7, and at grade 7 they learn English from grade 7 to grade 12. And now they've extended, like when my brothers went to school, they would get education to grade 8, and then parents would have to pay for them to get further education. Now the system is to grade 12. But some of the most fascinating work I found was with the Aboriginal people of Paraguay. I think there's about 7 different languages that the Aboriginals speak in there, but they have schools set up now, and they've had them for several years. And I think in the last 5 years, they've seen graduates in post-secondary from those schools and from Aboriginal people who go back then and work with Aboriginals. So I think it's fantastic what they're doing there. And so I just thought I'd mention from a school perspective that it's a developing country. I think we would call it a third world country, but they've come a long way in those respects. So I thought it was very interesting. So I thought I'd mention that to you.
And you're back safe and sound, and
I've had enough meat to last me a lifetime.
yes, Trustee Pauls.
I had a question that's around this actually for follow-up, but anybody else is welcome to add on to this. Most of the board yesterday did a tour of the foundry. Was that yesterday or the day before? I think it was just yesterday.
Couldn't have been Sunday.
I think it was yesterday. The foundry being, for those of you that don't know, it's a Abbotsford wraparound. It's one of 7 in the province right now of 15 partnership wraparound services for our youth and adolescents aged 12 to 25 that encompasses a myriad of everything from physical well-being to mental health to educational assistance to medical, a variety of different things. And the question arose while we were on the tour of this amazing place that is already has more need than they have space and staff to supply. That's how successful it's been in the 9 months that it's been open.
Partners,
Yeah, the 15 partners. So Abbotsford School District obviously is one of the 15 partners, one of the main 9, as opposed to the subsidiary supporting partners. And they said they have teachers and TAs on staff there. And our question was, in our partnership, is our contribution to that we pay the staff that are there, or is that do we have financial responsibilities to them or commitments, and how does the staffing of that work in partnership with the school district, or does it? So we were wondering if the superintendent could answer that for us.
Does not. Now I'm gonna. You caught me off guard, so can't quite remember the name of the program.
That's fine.
The program.
Yes. We know it because they would talk.
There's a name of a program there, and there is a teacher who is assigned to the program, and it's a provincial resource program. So you can say they're staff of the school district, but because they serve kids from the region and there, then it's seen as a contribution to it. But I lose the name. There's it'll come back.
Follow up with it. So
please.
What else? How else are we as a school district involved?
It's mainly staff time thereafter that. People who, so if it's one of our counselors or something like that, staff time, or someone like Nathan who serves there on a number of committees, that's also the kind of in-kind support, instruction for learning support services.
Thank you.
Okay, any other good stuff? I have a couple things, but if I'm going to be last. Okay, good news. This is old news, but it's kind of good news, bad news. The good news is we did not lose the reading challenge trustees versus senior management. Well, the bad news is that for the first time ever, they tied us. So our string of outright victories over many years has ended. We officially tied, so we're gonna have to up our game next year and
Add the
get on the
school app
books.
to your list of preferred reading materials.
But anyhow, that's and I had the privilege of being at the Sumas First Nations Enhancement Agreement meeting last night. Great food, a huge crowd, and I have to say that our principal of Aboriginal Education, Darlene McDonald, did an amazing job of making the meeting work and getting input from families about what they want their kids to be learning in our schools. It was a really great event, and again, well attended and a really good flavor to it. So I think that was excellent. Okay, seeing nothing else, our second 10-minute question period, and again, we ask you to not proceed your question by lots of comments, but simply ask a question related to our agenda. And if you could please state your name and direct that question to me, I might redirect to staff, but are there any questions?
So my name's Carol McKellen, as I stated earlier, and I actually have 3 questions, if I may. The first question, and just for clarification, is why would the tech ed program not be able to be offered on site? I missed what is happening with the tech ed part of the building.
I know that answer, but I could defer, I could.
Tech ed building is going to be going down in the first phase, so it's one of the first things that will go down as well as that little corridor. That old tech ed wing on the side by the street there, phase 1 is to be
like demolished?
Seismically upgrade, yeah.
Got it.
That first phase is going to hit that main corridor at the side there with the tech ed building front space.
Okay, is it possible that could be done over the summer?
It's too big a job.
But even
When
if
it eventually gets like a phase 1 to do the band, that's scheduled, that's an easier, that's a 3 months thing.
It would start this summer.
Okay, so my second question.
And maybe I can just say too,
So if we were to start that in the summer, if we look at a timeline and say we start July 1st, it's about a 6 or 8 month
Okay.
construction for that area. So it would be out virtually, if it comes available April 1st, it's a little bit late in the year to start offering courses in it.
About a year.
Okay,
So
so my second question is, you had option 1 and 2, where there would be portables on the facility from what I saw. If the option was put on the table about admin combining, and I mean no disrespect to any of the administration by this comment, if the administration was combined at the start of this, would we only have to get 3 portables if we were to keep option 1 or option 2?
yes.
Okay, so if that's the case, if the tech ed was the only thing that's gonna be impacted and PE classes, would the district look at taking those students to and from the tech ed at Rickhanson and returning them back to ATSS?
With the options, you could look at, they would have to be offered off timetable, the tech ed courses.
Okay.
Tech ed courses it's quite full at Hanson. So if you were looking right now, they're scheduled 6 blocks of tech ed courses next year for ATSS, not ATMS. So if you were to, I'm just playing out loud into how it's going.
Yep,
So just to play out loud, you would have with Article D23 the way it is, you could have 1 off timetable in the morning, and you could probably have 2 after school, 3 a day, flipping every day. But that would alter the schedule of that 1 teacher, right? And so now it becomes an issue. You're starting, but you can only go 6.5 hours. So where's that teacher going to?
So, yeah, so the question, yeah.
You may have to hire 2, but it can be done, but it'll need a change of staffing.
What about even proposing having all the tech ed courses in the second semester?
I'm gonna ask you to direct the questions this way, please, okay? Thank you.
Sorry. So the question I have is if the tech ed were to be offered in the second semester, if Mr. Veselak had said that it could be started in July and it would maybe potentially be available March, April. Is there any option that we could have the tech ed courses offered in the second semester and have the others so that we could avoid totally disrupting all these students?
One thing I'll tell you about these construction schedules, they're really good estimates too.
No, I get that.
But I wouldn't start the school year based on this is gonna be done on this date and we'll be able to start on this date doing, we always, even for a brand new school, we would leave, you know, a couple of months leeway. We'd want a school scheduled to be done in May so we could open it in September because we know that there's always some delay that's unforeseen, so.
Issues like that, student schedules start getting compromised. As soon as we get the first semester, there's something needed in the second semester. Can't have teaching 6 courses in one semester. So there's lots of variables.
The other question I have about tech ed, is there any possibility of any workplace that would be nearby that the equipment from the tech ed could be taken to, that could be rented at a low cost for X amount of months, that the students could actually go to in a nearby facility and actually have the tech ed that they could go to? It's just something I would thought that maybe we could ask.
And I guess I can say that no stone has been left unturned, and that, there's one more stone that you brought up, and I'm sure that's something that can be looked into, but the answer to that question right now is we don't have an answer.
It's just because I know so many students that are really hands-on, and I don't want them to be ostracized because of this decision.
Thank you.
And I value the tech ed program. We need construction people and all that kind of stuff, and so I just want.
Thank you. I'll stop you there. Yes, we understand that. Thank you. Other questions?
Hi, Nancy Steiger. Maybe comment about noise. Just wondering how much it will even impact the middle school, just as the middle school students, because they'll actually be in the building, maybe not in that part of the building. And what will we do to even like protect them? My child's very noise sensitive, so I'm like, he'll have a freak out if it's noisy and he has to study. Do you know what I mean? Like how do we manage that?
What I can tell you that the scope of work from what the consultants have told us is very invasive, and it's going to be very disruptive to
even the middle school.
Even in the middle school, there was a discussions early on about vacating the entire site, middle school and secondary school, because of how it has to be fenced off, and people are going to have to go outside and all the way around the hoarded construction area. So it's going to be a very intrusive work, and the more kids that are on the site, the longer it takes. So it could be 2, potentially 3 school years that it lasts for.
Next question is this question has, when do you think it will start? Like, not like when we're done talking about it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
When we're done consulting, going back, and when would we like to see the first hammer thrown?
July 8th.
Like literally this July. Like,
Well, we would like to see
great
it
if
as
it
soon as
was.
possible. So as soon as,
Do you think that's possible?
well, no.
I
Only
no,
because I worked with the ministry a lot, and it took us.
I know that's because
It's going to be a lot of back and forth. The
there's a lot-
chances
you said
of
there
us.
was 20 back and forth. I'm like, it's
Yeah.
already April.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't mean to
we
be
can get,
disrespectful. I'm
we
just
can get a lot. I mean, if we could have, we wouldn't start some of these things if we had to start in November, because it would mean starting the displacement in September, because we can't start partway through. So our plans are always to start at the start of a term, so in July 1, so or in some close proximity to that. We would like to get it started and approval before the end of the calendar year.
Yes.
So we would, I mean, I'm hopeful, but I don't want to raise anybody's hopes that we would have this project approved by the end of June. I mean, that would be great if we did, but.
So some things we do not control.
I understand that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Could construction start as early as September?
Could it?
Could it?
Yeah.
Okay,
Hi.
thank you.
Yeah, that's Jackson Elementary. 2 questions. First one just regarding one of the options that was up there with the grade 11 and 12s or the 9s and 10s being at the other school. For the teachers, will they have to be driving back and forth to the two schools within one school day to teach the different courses?
Again, that's a timetable question that probably can't answer now. I guess potentially that's a possibility.
Second question is really easy. The name of the book.
Oh, the name of the book.
The name of the book, please.
Oh.
I pass the torch to you.
I pass the torch to you. Thank
Yes,
you very much.
Beatrice, Elaine,
Silver.
Thank you.
all right?
Take a picture after.
Okay. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to say we are, first of all, thank you for coming, and we are adjourned.
Appreciate all that.
Something called anything.
Oh, sorry, I know.